Yeah, what's the mood like? Are you all awake?
Different.
Like, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
No, but what I did think was that, of course, the German situation is different. I'm not an expert, of course, of German politics, but it's true that here you did manage to create a lot of mobilization. And I do also believe that you're right, that you have actually managed to take up that cultural struggle. And of course, certain other things that you're speaking about has unfolded in the political landscape of Germany, has also made it necessary for you to say, this is a cultural struggle, and so on and so forth. But when I say cultural struggle, it's on microscopic levels. It's not enough to say we have an ecological.
No.
I mean, if you 19th, 20th century in France, in Denmark even, you had a party, a socialist party school in every city, where they were sitting and reading socialist intellectuals, where they were coming up with concepts, where they were coming up with notions. You said it yourself. I mean, in this country, there is a generational, let's say, or a history that obviously makes the question of production, fighting against production, very violent, even existential, I would say, on a collective level, right? But how do you go against it? With inventing the notions, the concept that allows, again, and I know I'm repeating myself, but it's a very important point, keeping on doing these, let's say, ideological work, simply.
Yeah.
Freedom. Who would ever vote for a party that wants to limit your freedom?
No.
It's ridiculous. I don't. It's terrible, right? Who wants to vote for a party that wants to degrow something? But that's a question of words. That's a question of concepts. Why call it degrowth? Why not call it prosperity? Well, a growth in economy, that's awful. It degrows the possibility of prosperity, of breathing the air, of prospering as a society. So the conceptual world, if you are to win that struggle, that I do strongly believe that you have taken up as potentially in your country or in the European context as one of the only climate movements, then you have to keep on doing that. Intellectual work is very important.
Yeah,
It's always been so.
Rewrite this down. But I think what is happening is that in Germany for a long time, some of you will won't like this, but I think actually a long time there was a deep belief in the environmental arena that being right is enough, and that at some point, one by one they will all come over to our side. We have the progressive ecologist arena, and we will, be very right, and then we will be a bit more right, and then we also know we are like morally right, and then one by one they come over and then get stuff done. Then we have a Rot-Rot-Grün on there, and all is good. We have it's ridiculous in a way that there was never a moment that this actually worked out, but there was a big belief, and I think the second belief is, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, the second belief was the idea that catastrophes would speak for themselves. And I think maybe in Germany it's because of Fukushima that, obviously appeared to be one of those catastrophes that would speak for itself, but even Fukushima didn't speak for itself. It was used politically. That's how Merkel made her politics, was through catastrophe, through huge events where she used the energy to channel it towards what she wanted to do. When we now think about what happened at the Ahrtal, the first thing that Armin Laschet said is that single catastrophe won't change our politics. And it's, it was actually very honest. Maybe it was even an important moment for us to understand catastrophes do not speak for themselves. Catastrophe can develop huge energy and channel a lot of what we're fighting for, but must be curated. It must be framed. And if it is not, and I think the European summer has actually been a good example there, if it's not being framed by the ecologist, it will certainly be framed by the other side. We've seen this in Italy, we've seen this in Spain, we've seen it in Slovenia, where the right-wing populists would stand in the midst of the catastrophe and say, that is the fault of the climate activist. And it makes no sense, but it was never about anything that makes sense. It worked out. In Slovenia, climate activists got hugely threatened as the right wings went up and said, if you would have allowed us to build more, the floods wouldn't have gone so bad. We saw this in the Ahrtal, where the trees were flooded away and hit the cars. What did the AfD say? If the ecologist would have allowed us to cut the trees, your car wouldn't be damaged. And it sticks. So if we don't curate catastrophe and build power outside of those moments, we won't win.
How much is it a generational thing in Germany? How is your the voting dispersion? I don't know.
So in the most convinced climate green voters, I mean, it's difficult because we're also a bit fed up with the Green Party. So I think it's a so that's not the greatest mechanism. But we see that, of course, younger people are technically very environmental friendly compared to other generations. But we see that the environmental question concerns all generations, and it's the older ones, the generation 60 plus, that are the most convinced that you need to change something in your private life. They are the ones who say, yes, I'm happy to get rid of my car or whatever, if I was asked to, if there was a politics asking me for. And in Germany, we have a huge majority of people who say we want the government to do more. And I think people should really know about this. We have an ecological majority in Germany of people who say, yes, we need a sustainable economy. Yes, the government needs to do more. Yes, we need to stick to our climate targets. But the vast majority of those people also think nobody else wants this. So we have a majority that doesn't know it's a majority. So that makes it a bit complicated.
I see. Somehow. So what is the plan? What time is it?
Yeah, so what do we talk about?
I've been lodged in a youth hostel next to Kit Kat Club. I didn't get a second of sleep because there was techno music in the rooms next to me, just for you to understand that I'm a little bit tired.
But I was wondering, can you talk maybe a bit about, or can you explain a bit further where you would see, because I've been talking about the conflict lines, can you talk a bit about where you see potential conflict lines that can be drawn?
I think I would say the same as I said before. The problem is, of course, the ecological conflicts are everywhere, but as long as we don't make this kind of conflict line that is, like, let's say, of course, a very wide one, but in order to somehow adjust our general understanding of the landscape, then I don't see how you can find a united narrative that can make people, like again in the 19th, 20th century, let's say, mirror themselves, feel, let's say, the antagonism that allows them to do politics. But of course, I mean, a country like Germany is a very good example. Of course, if I'm not completely wrong, after the Greens took some power here, they had to even apologize for being against production, right? Like they had to say, no, we're not against production. We're not for degrowth.
No, they aren't. No.
So, but nonetheless, this is where we stand. There's absolutely no ecological earth system scientist that believes that we can grow ourselves out of this. We have to make a struggle between those who believe that production is the horizon in society and those who have begun to understand that development, progress, production in the old sense of the word today means destruction, regressivity.
But they don't say that they want more. They just want a little bit more until the next election, just a little bit more. And I am.
But it needs to be declared.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we're in Germany, so this is not very popular because of Carl Schmitt. He was an awful guy, but he knew that politics was about friends and enemies. If you not say, that's my.
But then again, let's talk about it. What do we do, or what do we make out of it when we've come to a point that even the most, it's a good point. If the most, environmentalists, people, if those who would kind of find themselves in the center of a potential ecological class, even they have been socialized into a world where we do kind of believe, where every Hollywood movie, every podcast, every ad that we see somewhere tells us, you're the freest, the prettiest, and the nicest, and the luckiest if you go on that road trip in that VW.
Yeah. But that's what I mean, Louisa, with the cultural work. That's what I mean with the cultural work. I mean, imagine, you're completely right. Imagine what Jack Kerouac did for the idea of individual freedom. Yeah. Imagine what Frida Kahlo did for the idea of communism and so on and so forth. You need new narratives. This is why you have to team up with the artists. But it's, of course, you're completely right. It's completely impossible. I have a lot of friends who are musicians, right? And I always tell them, try to make a sexy guitar song about ecology. It's impossible. Because for 50, 80, whatever do I know, years, it's been about freedom and the individual and love. Yeah. But it's slowly beginning to change. It's slowly, you have to try. I mean, and of course people are beginning to do so, but you cannot skip that work, I think, because this is what touches people. This
It
what moves
is very
people.
much. Yet I would say also the artists, a lot of my friends right now are on a road trip in a van. And I think it's a bit funny because we were just so close on getting people on trains. And then the car industry came and said, just wait a second, you want a minimalist holiday? What about taking everything with you in an own car and parking it somewhere where you have a nature experience while you destroy that very nature? I think it's and it worked out. We all feel very free and we see our entire social media out there and it's really nice, and it's so you're close to nature and so on.
But the problem
it's working,
It is slowly going there, but the problem is, of course, that normally we know from history that it takes 100 years to create a class consciousness, a class aesthetics, a class culture.
We don't have that time.
And we have 7 or something like that, right? I mean, it's tough, but it's exactly because you don't have the time that you need to take the time.
Which someone should quote that sentence.
It's already in the book, but I like it very much, so I always use it. So I'm sorry, I'm just quoting myself. No, but you cannot skip that work. I mean, for 50 years, and I know here in Germany you have been better at it than us. That's also why I admire your work very much. But as long as you just keep on looking for the factual way of mobilizing people, looking for the catastrophe. I mean, people don't like catastrophe. It's super boring.
No,
the end of the world is a very boring incentive.
Yet it made it into 1 trillion Hollywood movies. I think technically the end of the world isn't so uninteresting. I think what we don't like about is positioning ourselves to it.
Sure.
The moment it happens in 2D and we watch it, I mean, it's interesting, right? The world is on fire, and what do? We watch Blockbuster about the apocalypse and listen to crime podcasts. And you would think that we want to. No, we don't. It's not that there's no mechanism that would get us excited for those things. But it's the way it's framed, the way it kind of excites us.
No, you're obviously completely right, but that's the existential aspect of things, which is enormously difficult. I mean, we're all realizing individually, collectively, we are different beings. You're not the same human being as you thought you were when you were 19 years old, walking through an airport, going to explore the world, being free, and so on and so forth. Today, you might do like this, but you know that you have another trace, another destructive set of traces going after you. I mean, it makes complete sense that people do like that. But it is those divisions internally and among us that we need to describe. Because if you want to fix together a life terrain, if you want to make alliances, which politics is about, and exactly it's because you have to do a friend and enemy that you can afterwards do diplomacy. That's something people never understand. But if you want to fix together a life terrain, sociological, existential, you have to describe it first. You have to describe how we are disconnected, how we feel it, but also how we don't feel it. Because let's be honest, you don't walk through with land sickness, as I call it, all the time. We do like this sometimes. We feel it in different ways because the pain is too big. Imagine, you spoke about your grandmother. She wrote a whole book with her grandmother. I wrote 1 chapter and my grandmother hates me now. 1 chapter, 5 sentences, and now she doesn't want to talk to me.
Yeah, it's a complete miracle that we still talk to each other.
But imagine her life biography. It touches completely into what you were speaking about before, about Germany and after the war and so on and so forth. My grandmother, after the war, her whole political autobiography was based on freedom, prosperity, production. Yeah. This is how she would give her life to me, to her descendants. All of a sudden, she has to realize not only that she has become an old-fangled hat, that history has turned in another direction, she has to realize that, of course, it did good things. There's a welfare state now in Denmark and so on and so forth that allows me to sit here and speak English, blah, blah, blah. But it also trapped her kids on an earth uninhabitable. But it's an enormous existential drama. Imagine that at the end of your life, realizing that everything you fought for, everything you were fighting, it makes complete sense that some people just do like that and look the other direction.
Explains a vast part of German politics, by the way. Obviously. It is just very depressing, I think, as a, Friedrich Merz, the concept of Friedrich Merz, makes so much sense if you listen to Nikolaj. Of course, it must be so frustrating to kind of turn back and realize for like 40 years, you've kind of rushed past the most important issue of all times and you have no answer to that. I mean, I wouldn't enjoy it. And, we see how it ends up, It's not a good life, I would assume. But it's a... Yeah, but it's. I think it is kind of funny, but also I think it's important to understand what this means. We had this different situation when the climate movement Fridays for Future arose in Germany. I got my own hashtag because people found out I've been flying before.
That's cool.
Yeah. So because I was, you know, as a student, you know, I would go with my church. I would go to Tanzania to build some well, and I would go with my school to Namibia. These things that were like huge opportunities back then, and it was framed to be like the most exciting thing I could possibly do for the world and for me and for my CV, of course. You know, go out and explore the world. I'm part of a generation you can call Generation EasyJet. You know, I grew up. And one time I would give Nachhilfe, I would get help students with their homework. And at some point I got back and I found out if I gave 4 lessons of math to some students, I could fly to London and back. I mean, it's ridiculous. But of course, if there's a world around us that tells us that is awesome, that's progress, it means you can go further and farther and faster and so on. And it was very funny that with Fridays for Future, we basically ended this, or tried to kind of at least dampen this hype around that kind of life. And so we got up and said, let's fight for structural changes and for a different idea of what a good life and a free life and a, you know, mobility can look like. And what did we get back? We get hashtags and hatred and people bullying us for the very culture that they created and put us into, that we then kind of questioned. And so the whole idea about Langstrecken-Luisa for me was, after all, you know, it got me into marathon running, which is nice.
What's the hashtag?
Langstrecken-Luisa, long distance Luisa, which I think is nice. You know, I do really enjoy the running now.
But she trained that one.
But it's, you know, it also tells us so much about the Kränkung, the despair that comes along with challenging a notion that has been out there about how fossil fuels would enable us to grow as a better society, as a safer and a more peaceful and the best version of all of us, and how we kind of canceled that down and got all the frustration from older generations with it.
I don't think we have any more clever to say. Should have stopped before when they clapped. It's over time now, no? What time is it? Okay. Thank you.
I think we're really at